They suffered some of the most brutal fates on the battlefields of the Second World War, and if they were captured often, then they were shot instantly on the spot. Female Soviet soldiers were seen on the front lines, and they had a huge variety of jobs in the Red Army and also the Soviet Air Force. From dropping payloads of bombs onto German positions, to nursing and even crawling through the bombed out ruins of Stalingrad to wait and then snipe a high ranking German officer. The women who fought against the Germans and the Axis often faced terrifying ends if they were captured though, and for their enemy, they thought that women should be nowhere near the battlefield at all. They regarded female soldiers as a backward policy of the exact beliefs that they wanted to wipe out and destroy. But why were German soldiers and officers ordered to shoot female soldiers on sight and pull the trigger on them as soon as they captured them? Women played a pivotal role in the Soviet Union's war effort. Most of them worked inside industry and agriculture, keeping the armaments industries going and keeping the land fed. But to make up for a shortage of men who were lost on the Eastern Front, repelling the German invasion of the nation, women were allowed to fight on the front line. Around 800,000 women served in the Red Army, and most of them worked in medical units. In total, they made up around 5% of the country's military personnel deployed during World War II. Stalin, to begin with, turned thousands of women away from serving in the military who had volunteered, but then as things became troublesome, with huge losses and casualties in the fierce fighting of the Eastern Front, Stalin began to accept women who wanted to risk their lives in military operations and actions. One of the most famous roles they undertook was as aviators and flyers. In particular, there was the 46th Guards Night Bomber Regiment, a collection of women aviators and pilots who flew raids under the cover of darkness, dropping bombs from outdated biplanes, often in silence on enemy positions. These women became known as the Night Witches, but there were other female aviation regiments, including some who flew fighters against the Luftwaffe. Also, the Soviet Union deployed women as snipers inside towns and cities. Around 2,500 women served as snipers, and they would crawl through bombed-out ruins in cities such as Stalingrad and Leningrad, waiting their time to take out a high-ranking officer. The combined kill total of female snipers was around 11,000, almost 5 times their total deployment numbers, and some racked up huge kill counts. Around 500 of these women would survive the war, but women also served in anti-aircraft batteries and in second lines of attack and defence. Most were told to carry weapons and rifles, even those who helped to evacuate men from the front lines if they had become injured. However, in the eyes of the Germans and the Nazi enemy, the use of female soldiers wasn't just shocking, they deemed it as subhuman and immoral. Because of this, captured female Soviet soldiers were shot by Germans after their capture rather ruthlessly. There were other reasons too, but the shooting of women in uniform was rooted in Nazi ideology, military orders, and the combat reality of life on the front lines. Firstly, the Nazi ideology and policies stated that a woman's role was linked closely to childbearing and serving the male-dominated state. From a young age, German women were told that their place was in the home, and they were told to have as many children for the Reich as possible, so Hitler could build up a huge empire. Also, they were taught in youth groups how to cook and maintain a household, and they were not expected to have high-status jobs. The idea for the Nazis of a woman holding a rifle and fighting in combat was viewed as a violation of the natural order, and German propaganda depicted Soviet women soldiers as not feminine, and they categorised the actions as a murderous policy of communism and Bolshevism. The presence of women on the battlefield for the Red Army directly challenged the Nazi worldview, so when German troops captured armed Soviet women, they believed they were dealing with unnatural enemies rather than legitimate soldiers who did deserve the protection of prisoner of war status. This was all ideological, and it led to many women being shot, especially by SS soldiers. The German military also did not recognise female combatants as lawful soldiers, even when they were wearing uniform, carrying military ID, and serving as part of larger Red Army units. They were frequently labelled as partisans and resistance fighters, And this was very important, as the German army and the SS had standing orders to shoot partisans immediately. The Eastern Front was also deliberately exempt from the standards of the Geneva Convention. With this, it meant that a woman in uniform could be just said to have been a partisan and then shot, when this was not the case at all, and it would of course be technically a war crime. The commander of the German Fourth Army, Gunther von Kluge, issued an order to his men that, I quote, "all women who were found in Soviet army uniform are to be shot straight away." As mentioned, a large number of female Soviet soldiers served in highly skilled combat roles, in particular those as snipers. Some were trained in sniper training schools, and women like Lyudmila Pavlyuchenko racked up dozens of kills. Now, snipers of any army were usually shot upon their capture because they inflicted casualties and death without being seen, and they were viewed as silent assassins rather than ordinary infantry soldiers. The Germans reported encountering women in sniper roles unfairly, and the shootings of women soldiers became even more common. Female medics also faced this fate too, as the Germans believed that the medics were actually trained fighters and were helping to prolong Soviet resistance, and even unarmed female stretcher bearers were also shot. Hitler's directives for the invasion of the Soviet Union made it very clear that the conflict was ideological, racial, and total. The rules of war in his eyes did not apply with this, and he wanted the enemy to be physically destroyed, not just defeated. With this, he issued a number of illegal orders that would come back to haunt some of his generals later on. He issued the Commissar Order in June 1941, in which political officers were to be shot immediately, and also the Barbarossa Jurisdiction Order, that German soldiers were not to be prosecuted for crimes committed against Soviet civilians and prisoners of war. In particular, with this order, it allowed German soldiers to shoot women or anyone without any fear of reprisal, and they did this as they found it easier to deal with the female soldiers there and then, rather than send them back to prisoner of war camps for processing. With women soldiers being so strongly linked to the policies of the Soviet Union too, they were sometimes shot under the Commissar Order and were considered political fighters. The orders given by Hitler and the German military high command also normalised the shooting of women, and they were swept up in the machinery of extermination. Testimony from Soviet survivors and post-war German interrogations showed that following the capture, that women often faced horrific ordeals before they were then shot. Sometimes they were assaulted by forces who captured them, and then they would be taken to a discreet area and were given a quick neck shot, leading to their instant deaths. It showed the terror that women faced on the battlefields. But to the Soviets, they deployed women as powerful propaganda symbols and showed them in recruitment posters and newsreels as staunch defenders of the nation. Many women were given the ultimate accolade of the Hero of the Soviet Union award, but to the German soldiers, they believed that this was all unnatural, and shooting them became a psychological weapon. So, to sum up, there were many different reasons why female Soviet soldiers were shot. Firstly, the women in combat were seen as unnatural and subhuman. Also, they were labelled incorrectly as partisans instead of lawful prisoners of war. Many of them held important and powerful roles, such as snipers or scouts, and these specific fighters were commonly shot after their capture. Also, the Eastern Front, where they served, rejected all of the normal wartime protections, and there were many incidents which went unpunished. The German soldiers also believed they would not face reprisal for their actions too. But still today, there will be Soviet female soldiers who lie in their graves in lands where they fought, and their stories may be lost to time, but their stories deserve to be told. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, maybe click subscribe. And once again, thank you for giving up your time to watch this video. Thanks again.